Hello and welcome to the Student Sustainability Research Showcase. My name is Mackenzie Beveridge. I am the Senior Academic Program Coordinator for the Environmental Science Institute here at UT Austin. This is a 5-part session highlighting student research within 3 degree programs, the Bridging Disciplines Program, and the Green Fund. Each session will be moderated by faculty and staff who will introduce the students in that session. Before we begin, I have some housekeeping reminders. Your video and audio are deactivated as an attendee. The chat feature is turned off. Please put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A and I will ask them on your behalf. I do encourage you to upvote a question if you would like to see it answered. Please note that you can't ask questions anonymously, but if you would like to leave anonymous feedback about campus sustainability, you can do so through a feedback form on the Office of Sustainability website, and a QR code to this form is shown on the slides that run during break. Okay, so first, we will be hearing from Sustainability Studies students. Dr. Molly Polk, the Associate Director of the Sustainability Studies, will be moderating the session and introducing the students. So will the speakers in the session please turn on your video so that you can be spotlighted. And Molly, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Mackenzie. One of the hallmarks of the Sustainability Studies degree, which is housed in the College of Liberal Arts in the Department of Geography and the Environment, is that our majors have to complete 2 experiential learning requirements. One of those is taking an internship course that I teach called Directed Internships in Sustainability, where students not only are enrolled in the course, but they're completing an internship in sustainability. And that's typically in a nonprofit organization, a business, a government agency, or some other similar organization. The other requirement for experiential learning is a capstone course that's taught by Dr. Jamie Walenta, Capstone in Sustainability. It's SUS 374. And in that course, students tackle an independent research project that they design and that they then analyze and collect the data, analyze the results, and present those results at the end of the semester. So we're going to hear from students who are just wrapping up most of those experiences. So I'm pleased to introduce Alexi Hill, who's graduating this month. She is finishing her internship at the Water Environment Association of Texas, and Alexi will start us off. After Alexi, we'll go right into hearing from Bridget Thompson and Kaya Robinson about their capstone project. Bridget is also graduating this month. Congratulations, Bridget and Alexi. Kaya is graduating in the spring, and she, in addition to sustainability studies, is also pursuing a certificate in smart cities through the Bridging Disciplines program. So Alexi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Polk. Yeah, so I am interning at WEAT right now, the Water Environment Association of Texas. I've called my presentation Working for a Member-Driven Texas Nonprofit Organization. It's a relatively smaller NGO compared to other ones that I've read about or learned about. And it's pretty interesting to be working for a relatively smaller organization. Next slide, please. So WEAT is an open association of water environmental professionals, practitioners, operations specialists, and public officials. It has 3 main goals. One of them is to foster members' professional growth and development in a sort of alliance of water professionals. The organization actually works a lot in association with other ones and together try to promote some sound legislation. Another goal is to educate the public on water quality issues. And the third goal is to generally benefit society through the protection and enhancement of the water environment. Next slide, please. So there are 3 main components in the structure of WEAT. There is the executive board, the membership component, and 32 committees. The executive board is what runs WEAT. There are about 14 people on this board. That includes like the president, the vice president, And my supervisor is the executive director, so she's on this board as well. They basically work on the logistics of the organization. They focus a lot on funding and they also work on getting some programs started and other initiatives. The membership component of WHEAT is a really important one because as a nonprofit, WHEAT gets most of its funding from either membership fees or individual donations from those people. The third aspect is the committees. There are 32 committees, each headed by either a chair or multiple co-chairs, and each committee is separated into 4 different categories. Those categories are knowledge, delivery, stakeholder, and management. So they're organized into these 4 subcategories to kind of focus their mission and goals a bit more. For example, knowledge may deal more with like student outreach and just generally providing information about the water environment to its members. And the delivery category may deal more with promoting legislative advice. Next slide, please. My internship responsibilities, there have luckily been many opportunities for advancement in my internship, but the main thing that I've been working on is my role as a committee liaison. Basically, I've been speaking with about half of the 32 committees, so about 16. And I've been working between these committees and the executive board in different initiatives. And I've also been collecting information from committees, which also involves membership auditing and collecting information for the Texas Wet magazine. Another part of my internship has been writing for the Texas Wet magazine. I'm very excited for the print versions to come out. So the Texas Wet magazine involves a lot of kind of day-to-day water quality issues. Those are highlighted there, as well as there are also operator highlights, facility highlights, and I was able to write a small piece on the field of sustainability and how it has a pretty bright future because we're always going to need it, especially in water. Another part of my internship has been a lot of data entry, whether it be to the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality website, or the WHEAT database. I've also been working on website updates for the WHEAT website. Another big part has been membership work, which involves account registration, renewal, and just speaking individually one-on-one with different members about the opportunities that come whenever you do sign up for membership. I've also been able to assist in the organization of web-based conferences. Recently, we did the Water Reuse of Texas 9th annual conference that was virtual, and I was very happy to be a part of that, take some notes. And my last component of the internship has been creating social media campaigns and scheduling content releases. A big part of WHEAT's kind of newer initiatives have been geared towards increasing the audience that WHEAT targets because they no longer want to just focus on water professionals. They also want to get other people involved. So we've been posting a lot on like Instagram, Facebook, and other social media platforms to widen that audience. Next slide, please. So yes, thank you for listening to my presentation. I'm really happy to be a part of WHEAT right now, especially in the environment that we're in, where we're all adjusting to working from home and learning from home. It may be difficult, but I'm really happy to be part of this organization. Thank you so much.
Hi. So me and my partner Bridget are going to be presenting our capstone project today. It's called Diversify the Syllabi, Creating a DEI Framework for Analysis. Next slide, please. So what is this project? So our project is seeking to create a framework to analyze the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of the syllabi within the College of Liberal Arts. So it's a two-part project. So this semester, we're going to be doing the research, creating the framework to analyze the syllabi, and then testing the framework to make sure it works. And then next semester, we're going to be analyzing a larger amount of syllabi. So why is it important? So this past year, the injustice against Black and Indigenous people of color, especially Black people, have been at the forefront of international conversations. And this has led to many organizations expanding their diversity efforts, with the University of Texas being one of those organizations. So the Diversity Office gave 52 grants to different projects that promote community transformation, and this was one of those projects. Next slide, please.
So how is DEI related to sustainability, and why should courses be diverse, equitable, and inclusive? So sustainability is usually conceived of as something that only pertains to the environment. However, it's much more complex. For this project, we adhered to the definition of sustainability as being made up of three interrelated and equally important pillars: environment, economics, and social justice or equity. This project was designed with an emphasis on the social equity aspect of sustainability, as it is the most closely tied with DEI. So because this project is so closely aligned with the social equity pillar, we felt it was necessary to define that pillar as well. We defined social equity through a feminist and Marxist lens. Since both concern power relations, they can help us critically evaluate how power functions in our relationships and in turn influences our relationship with the economy and the environment. So we also applied these two, we also applied these two lenses to DEI because power relations are constantly at play in the classroom among faculty, staff, and students at institutions of higher learning. So when faculty and staff members at institutions of higher education prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in their discipline and demonstrate this through their courses, it can help create systemic change. Next slide, please.
So our research didn't go as we originally planned. We planned to send out the faculty survey first, and then have the faculty send out the survey to their current students. That way we'd be able to analyze the data side by side to see if the faculty were doing as well as they thought they were doing. One of the challenges we anticipated was getting enough responses from students of color. So in order to get as many responses as possible, we sent out the student survey to the undergraduate advisor. And then, so because that one was sent out first, we weren't able to analyze it side by side, but we were still able to use the data to create a framework and then test that data on some syllabi. Next slide, please. So 100% of the responses we got from the students agreed that diversity, equity, and inclusion were important aspects of their education. But then these responses are how they thought about the department's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you can see, most people agreed that the department was committed. Next slide, please. So this shows the race and ethnicity of the responses that we got. What we noticed is that Black students were more likely to agree that the department was not committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. So 100% of the faculty agreed that promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion were important in education, and this is how they felt about the department's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you can see, almost all of them agreed that the department was committed and no one disagreed. Next slide, please.
So we started off in order to build our framework by analyzing several existing DEI frameworks in order to gain a sense of what is already out there. And while the three components of DEI are interrelated and often intersect in many of the existing frameworks, we decided to build one that would analyze each component separately. This will enable us to see if some courses are strong in one aspect of DEI, such as diversity, and perhaps weaker in other aspects, such as inclusion or equity. Next slide, please. When we use the term diversity, we're specifically referring to the differences among social identity groups that are based on things such as class, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and age. And so the image that you see on the right is a screenshot of the framework that we're developing. And so this section of the framework will be used for an analysis of the syllabi in order to discern if a specific social identity group is the main focus of the course. So if a course is not centered around a certain group, the course can still be analyzed for any mention of other diversity aspects. And so this will be done by evaluating which groups are covered and for how long, as well as the identity of scholars cited and the variety of perspectives included. Next slide, please. This brings us to the equity portion of the framework, We defined equity according to the one that can be found in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So equity means dealing fairly and equally with all concerned. In classes with students from a variety of backgrounds, it's important to evaluate policies outlined in the syllabi that specifically pertain to students. So these could be policies regarding students with disabilities, students with children who therefore have priorities outside of the classroom. And in addition to policies, we will also be looking at textbooks and other reading materials. Some courses might require textbooks to be purchased by students. Others might have readings available online by Canvas at no cost to students, and some courses may require readings to be printed and brought to class. So all of these details in course syllabi will affect students differently based on class and access to certain resources. So that is what we're specifically looking at when we're creating the equity section of the framework. Next slide, please. So the last section of the framework focuses on inclusion, and similarly with equity, we defined it according to what was stated in the dictionary. So the act or practice of including and accommodating people who have historically been excluded because of their race, gender, sexuality, or ability. In the syllabi, we were looking for details about the type of classroom environment fostered by the instructor. So this would look like how are class discussions facilitated, which students normally tend to dominate those discussions. Does the instructor remind students to be self-conscious of how often they speak? Some of the other things that we'll be looking for are the identities of the scholars cited throughout the course. If a course is about race and ethnicity, for example, how many of the scholars cited are Black, Indigenous people of color? How many are Black women? And are readings by BIPOC scholars merely suggested and not mandatory? So that's a quick rundown of the framework that we're in the process of developing and each of the 3 sections of it. Next slide, please.
So what's next for our project? So far we've begun to test the framework on the 3 to 4 syllabi within the Department of Geography and the Environment. What we're noticing is that there are some things that we didn't think of and also things that we included that we no longer need. So we're going to be adding and taking away from the framework. And the next semester, we're going to be analyzing 30 to 40 or maybe more syllabi within the College of Liberal Arts. Next slide, please. So that's it, and thank you for listening.
So there's a question in the chat that says, do you think your framework could be applied to departments outside of geography? And that's something that Kaya and I were specifically thinking of when designing this framework. We had conversations with Dr. Polk and Dr. Walenta about this framework maybe being applied to other departments in liberal arts. So that's something that we're specifically trying to figure out while we're developing it.
Yeah, that's great. That's one of the questions that I had actually, just in terms of how you might apply your course review method to the entire course catalog, even going beyond COLA. So that's really great that you're already thinking about that. That was a really great session. So I do have a question for Alexi. Can you discuss how your internship experience is preparing you for your future career, and talk a little bit about the skills that you think you've developed from this experience?
Yes, thanks for that question. Well, my general career goals revolve around working with nonprofit organizations, and being in this current internship, it's been really interesting to work with like a smaller organization that runs on a smaller budget and has different considerations than perhaps a larger like corporation or something. And I've learned a lot about taking initiative with communication, because some people may be a bit busy working on other extremely important aspects of such an organization, but really getting communication across that allows for, I don't know, kind of a really free flowing conversation. I think that's really important when working with other people in general. I think the communication aspect has really helped me.
Absolutely. Yeah, those soft skills are so critical for students that are entering into the workforce. We do have a little bit more time. We have 3 or 4 more minutes. So I'm actually going to ask a follow-up question for Kaya and Bridget. What would you recommend to students in other departments if they wanted to apply this framework and sort of follow in your footsteps with the work that you've done?
I think, well, when we developed it, it was mostly for the College of Liberal Arts. For some schools, it would definitely not work as well, like with math or things. So I think they could definitely use it as like a base and then make it work for other departments as well.
Right. And Bridget, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think Kaya said that perfectly, because there are some things about the framework that might not apply to other departments, like she said, especially for STEM courses. And I know that other departments, they have their own challenges with diversity and equity and inclusion as well.
Right. And Molly, did you have anything that you wanted to ask of the students before we transition into the next session?
No, I don't think so. Just to congratulate them on these achievements this semester. It's really nice to see students bridge their academic learning with sort of real world learning, whether that be at an internship or developing their own research projects. So congratulations to all 3 of them, and thanks for participating.
Yes, I second that, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much to Alexi, Bridget, and Kaya. Your presentations were wonderful. And of course, thank you to Molly for moderating this session. And so now we will switch over to our next session. In this session, we'll be hearing from environmental science students. Jeff Halleck, who is the Environmental Science Program Advising Coordinator, will be moderating this session. And as soon as we flip over to those, Jeff will be taking it away. And here we go. Hi, Jeff. Good to see you.
Hey, good to be seen.
Yeah. All right. Please take it away.
All right. Let's see. Can you guys see me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Cool. I couldn't see myself on the screen, so I just wanted to double check. All right. Well, hey, hello, everyone. As Mackenzie said, I'm Jeff Halleck. I'm the program coordinator and the advisor for the Environmental Science Program. And we're a small program, small interdisciplinary program. We've been around for about 10 years. And the program is a field studies program that integrates material from geology, biology, and geography to create a hands-on, practical learning experience that aims to prepare our students to tackle the immediate and future environmental issues that our society faces. So it's a very dynamic program. Our students pursue environmental science generally, and then they then choose one of those tracks, geology, biology, or geography, to then further their education in. So we've got 3 great student talks for you today that are going to illustrate our interdisciplinary nature of our program, and that will also highlight a couple of our different tracks. The first is going to be Catherine Faulkner. She's going to discuss how traditional ecological knowledge can be utilized in space sustainability. And then we have Rebecca Garza. She'll be discussing how investigating the impact of urban stream restoration projects will actually have what kind of impact that has on stream functionality. And then the last talk, Avery McKittrick, she will talk about barriers to climate change communication during times of global distress. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Faulkner. I've been working on space sustainability and integrating that with environmental science. So something I did not expect when I became an environmental science major was that space sustainability and policy would become something I was so passionate about and interested in. I actually learned about it through the environmental science UGS course, Sustaining a Planet, and I learned about the tragedy of the commons and how space is considered the final frontier. And I also learned how Dr. Mariba Jha, a space scientist and aerospace engineer at UT Austin, is currently working on research with this. And he works with space trafficking and the monitoring of orbital debris. And I was fortunate enough, after asking him if I could work on something with him, that he gave me something to do. Next slide. So just as a brief recap, what is the tragedy of the commons in general? It's a philosophy that the shared public resources tend to create a selfish exploitation of public goods, regardless of it's sustainable or not. This can be exemplified by the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, where there was overexploitation of public grazing land, which led to severe droughts in America. The Earth orbit is no exception, and at the moment, Earth's orbit is practically lawless. There are treaties such as the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, but there's a lack of commitment and accountability for those currently using the Earth's orbit. So for instance, in this astrograph on the right, all of those dots are actually space debris. They're not to size necessarily, but it's rocket bodies, it's satellites, it's all these different things that are currently in the Earth's orbit. And it's crazy to think that there's so much out there. So then the question becomes, how can we recreate both quantitative and qualitative guidelines for sustainability? So let's not recreate the wheel here. If there are people or groups that have already given insight into sustainable practices for generations, then we should listen to them. And that's why Dr. Jha and I have been an advocate for traditional ecological knowledge. Next slide. Traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK for short, pertains to the conservational knowledge held by various indigenous communities and the perspective of particular groups that can be utilized in near-Earth orbit sustainability. Next slide. These are the guidelines, there's 6 of them. So the first one is factual observation, and this is how humans can classify the natural world. And this can be utilized for understanding and defining the nature of near-Earth's orbit. Next slide. The second one is sustainable use of resources. As it implies, this tenet suggests ways for us to maintain a sustainable use of resources so that they are not depleted. And if we can quantify the capacity that is sustainable for an orbit, then we can quantify what is a sustainable number of objects within an orbit without collisions. Next slide. Yes. The third one is past and current uses. This tenet refers to the passed down generational knowledge of natural occurrences. This can be used in space sustainability to refer to how the night sky in our orbit has changed over time, and we can assess the implications of human consumption on our orbital resources. Next slide. Ethics and values. This is a kind of standard idea of what is just and unjust practices. This can be used in universal standards for what ethics should be for the space traffic, rather than based on my idea and then maybe someone else's idea. Next slide. Cultural relationships. This is an abstract concept of the relationship between cultures and the environment around them. And this ties into how space sustainability can be used for the preservation of culture and how we need to be mindful of how others see orbital clutter. Next slide. This one's a little more abstract, cosmology. This is a philosophy of humans' roles within the universe, and this tenet is a philosophical argument that humans have a spiritual tie to all things, including space. Because remember, we are all stardust. So these are the 6 tenets. Next slide. So I was really fortunate to work not only with Dr. Jha, but the Environmental Science Institute. And through this, I was able to help create a web page with just writing and editing. And then I had many friends in ESI help actually make the web page as shown on the right. And quick plug, if you would like to visit the ESI website, the link is at the very bottom of the slide. And so then what's next? I'm currently working with a team with Dr. Jha's students to create more definitions of what orbital carrying capacity means in our sense of the word. And I'm using traditional ecological knowledge as a framework to potentially think of how we can create more inclusive guidelines for everyone. And just as an environmental science major, I provide a lot of knowledge into biological allegories associated with carrying capacity. And that's my time. Thank you for listening.
Hi guys, my name is Rebecca Garza and I'm a sophomore environmental science major, and today I'm going to be talking about investigating source and quantity of dissolved organic matter in Waller Creek. So as a brief overview, I'm going to be discussing dissolved organic matter, the Waller Creek Restoration Project, as well as my proposed project. Next slide, please. So I'd first like to define what dissolved organic matter is. Dissolved organic matter is dissolved carbons and nitrates within the stream, and it's deeply correlated to the food web. Now, dissolved organic matter can be quantified into two different groups, microbially derived and terrestrially derived. Microbially derived organic matter originates from within the stream, from microbes as it sounds, and terrestrially derived organic matter originates from outside of the stream, from things like leaf litter and soils. Now, microbially derived organic matter is associated with lower flows and urban streams, whereas terrestrially derived organic matter is associated with higher flows and non-urban streams. Next slide, please. So like I just mentioned, hydrology patterns and dissolved organic matter are related, so that's going to be important moving forward. However, in urban streams, these patterns can be a little bit difficult to decipher. So why should we study dissolved organic matter? We should study dissolved organic matter because it gives us information about water quality, about ecosystem energy production within the stream, as well as it can give us some overall observations about stream health. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the Waller Creek Diversion Tunnel. So this is a project that was designed to divert floodwaters from the surrounding Waller Creek floodplain during high flows. So this image, as you can see here, this profile on the left, is underneath the lower Waller Creek portion. And Waller Creek is the creek that runs through the University of Texas, by the way. So in the downtown area, when it floods, the floodwaters are diverted into this tunnel and they flow from the right to the left into Lady Bird Lake. However, during low flow, which is a lot of the time in Texas, it also pulls water up from the left here at the lake and pumps it up into the lower portion of the stream. This dramatically alters the source of the water in the lower portion of the stream. Next slide, please. So we were able to look at the effects of the diversion tunnel on discharge this past summer. As you can see on the left, we have the pre-tunnel, prior to the implementation of the tunnel, and on the right is after the implementation of the tunnel. If you look at the y-axes here on these graphs, you can see that there's a dramatic alteration in the hydrology variability. On the left here, we have up to 63 cubic feet per second, whereas on the right, we only have 11 cubic feet per second. So this leads us to our hypotheses that hydrology and source of the water in lower Waller Creek will change dissolved organic matter. Next slide, please. So the big question that we're approaching here is, how does the diversion tunnel impact dissolved organic matter, source, and quantity? We have two primary hypotheses. Our first is that alterations of source water will cause a decrease in dissolved organic matter concentration in lower Waller Creek relative to the upstream concentration. We think this is going to be true because there's going to be a difference in the source of the water now that it's from Lady Bird Lake, the lake, instead of from an urban stream. Our second hypothesis is that the source of dissolved organic matter in lower Waller Creek is going to shift towards more microbially derived content. Remember, that's associated with urban streams. We believe that this will be true because we'll see less scouring flows, and therefore those microbial communities will have more time to grow. We also think it could be associated with the change in source again. Next slide, please. So our planned research methods is that this project is going to take place in the spring of 2021. We'll take both discrete and continuous measurements, sampling for dissolved organic matter, pH, temperature, and turbidity. And we're going to take samples across 7 different sites. 3 sites are going to be above the implementation of the diversion tunnel, 3 sites will be below, and 1 will be at the tunnel outlet. This arrow here on the left indicates where the implementation of the diversion tunnel is, so you can kind of picture that in your mind. Everything below that arrow should be affected by this diversion tunnel. Next slide, please. So after we gather our data and we analyze it, we expect our research to have the following impacts. We'll be able to evaluate how changes in dissolved organic matter source and quantity are affected by the implementation of this restoration project. We'll be able to add to our knowledge of the effects of restoration projects, contribute to our understanding of stream energetics, that is energy movement within the stream among organisms, and we'll also be able to communicate our data with Austin stakeholders, including the Waterloo Greenway Conservancy and the City of Austin, so they can make more informed restoration decisions. Next slide, please. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Freshman Research Initiative, my collaborators, as well as our generous funders. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Avery McKittrick. I'm a senior environmental science major on the biology track, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my research that I did last spring and this summer on the finite pool of Voria as part of my capstone for my degree program. So next slide. So I think we can all agree that 2020 has been a pretty tumultuous year, from bushfires in Australia to a global stock market crash to COVID-19. It seems that really everything has been put on hold. Next slide. But I have a really distinct memory of fall 2019 when my org and I were planning for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which was this past April, and when Greta Thunberg inspired us to live more sustainably. So what happened? Why did everyone suddenly forget that we were actually starting to make some progress towards a greener way of life? The obvious answer is that we have bigger fish to fry, right? But I believe that a more complete answer is rooted deep in evolutionary history. Allow me to explain on the next slide. So a recent hypothesis called the finite pool of worry hypothesis says that when there are too many things to worry about all at once, as there have been in 2020, we have to pick and choose which things we want to devote our mental coping resources to. Next slide. We can simplify which risks we devote our worry to by sorting them into one of two categories. Are they processed by the associative system or the analytical system of the brain? The associative system is fast and intuitive. It's rooted really deep in evolutionary history. All animals have this. You may have heard this described as your, quote, gut reaction. And the analytical system is relatively new in evolutionary history. Only humans have this. It's understanding and comprehension through facts and figures, like a graph of the changing climate over time. Next slide. And so using this basic knowledge, I predicted that most people will use their associative system to process climate change, since it's understood mostly through facts and figures. When the analytical system says to worry about climate change, but the associative system says to worry about other things, the associative system wins. So the only people who are able to prioritize combating climate change in 2020 are those whose climate change risks outweigh their other risks, which is comparatively very, very few people. So next slide. We can look at three well-known risks in 2020 a different way, placed on a matrix where they can be compared in their controllability, fatality, whether it's a new risk or an old risk, and whether or not the effects of that risk are delayed. So you can see the three I've put here are climate change, Black Lives Matter and racial justice, and COVID-19. So if you can go to the next slide. I predicted that the risk in the upper right hand of the corner of this matrix will take center stage in 2020, while the risk in the bottom left will be overshadowed by the other risks. Next slide. And in order to test my hypothesis, I used Twitter. I pulled climate change, COVID-19, and Black Lives Matter tweets from Twitter from late June to late July in 2020. I categorized each tweet from each risk category as either emotional or processed with the associative system, or fact-based and processed by the analytical system. I also looked at Google searches for these categories from fall of 2019 to late July of 2020. Next slide. So I found that COVID-19 had the highest tweet volume by far, which is perhaps not surprising, followed by racial justice and then climate change. Next slide. And so when I performed a sentiment analysis of these tweets, so categorizing them into emotional or fact-based, I found that the racial justice tweets were far more emotional by far, meaning that this issue is highly personal and tangible for a lot of different people, or processed by the associative system, as opposed to climate change, for example, which was talked about mostly using dry statistics and charts on Twitter. COVID-19 was processed by both the analytical and associative systems, giving it a key edge over the other two risks. So next slide. And Google showed similar results. We can see that searches are highest for COVID-19, followed by racial justice, and then climate change. Next slide. So these results show that the finite pool of worry is definitely at play in 2020. The associative system is allowing climate change, which is largely impersonal to most Americans, to be forgotten in the face of other risks. So next slide. And finally, just some recommendations based on the results of this research is that I recommend avoiding facts and charts when talking about climate change. They simply aren't enough, and people will forget about climate change when they have other risks to worry about. The second thing I have is to make climate change personal, bring it home and tell a story. This can elicit a more associative reaction that's more effective in spurring immediate action on climate change. And then finally, don't scare individuals into acting on climate change with too much doom and gloom. Instead, focus on solutions which will bring us closer to each other, ourselves, and the world around us. Next slide. And that's all I have. Thanks to the Center for Media Engagement and the Moody College of Communication, the College of Natural Sciences, and Dr. Anthony Dudo and his research group.
All right, great. Thank you all. Those were great presentations. So now we'll open it up. We've got a few minutes. to open it up to some Q&A.
Yes, I have a few questions here for everyone. First, we're going to start with Catherine. How might your TEK and carrying capacity work be applied to the campus?
So that's a really good question. I feel like TEK might have more implications for the campus. Carrying capacity, obviously UT is doing the research, so it does have weight on that, and it would be something that we could contact other organizations for. But with TEK especially, I think the really interesting thing is the idea that generational knowledge has been passed down through generations of indigenous communities. And so it would be important to listen to them because there are communities that have so much knowledge on sustainability issues, not just with my research, but with climate change, botany, medicine, all those different things. So I think if maybe even like with the DEI that we were talking about, maybe making it more open that, oh, there are ways that we can talk to Indigenous communities and hear their perspectives, and that might give us new perspectives on how to do things differently here.
That's great. Yeah, one quick follow-up question actually from Dr. Banner. He says, what levels and or types of DOM favor the aquatic biota in Waller Creek?
So the
That was for Rebecca, sorry.
Yeah. So the aquatics in Waller Creek, the dissolved organic matter there tends to be more microbially shifted. And that's because Waller Creek suffers from a lot of pollution and urban stream syndrome, which is associated with like this eutrophication and overgrowth of algae and microbes within the stream. So yes, a lot of the dissolved organic matter tends to be microbially derived in comparison to terrestrially derived.
Wonderful, thank you. A question for Avery. How do you recommend approaching the topic of climate change with a cranky uncle at Thanksgiving? What kind of story would you tell?
Yeah, what a great question. I would definitely recommend, and I've heard this from a few different people who do interpretation or explaining the natural world to people who maybe aren't as inclined to their natural side. You can do just that. If your uncle maybe likes to spend time fishing or hunting, maybe find a way that climate change is impacting those things and tell a story about that. It's really going to depend on the person you're talking to. So if I were doing a tour at the Wildflower Center, maybe I'd talk about the wildflowers and how they're affected by climate change. So it's going to depend on what your uncle likes. Does your uncle really like to, a certain kind of vegetable that'll be impacted by climate change? So kind of knowing your uncle and knowing what's going to hit close to home for him, and telling a story about that and how climate change will impact those things that he knows and loves. And maybe he lives on the coast and his house is going to be impacted by rising sea levels. So definitely just knowing your audience is probably the biggest advice I can give in those kinds of situations.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really good advice. I've definitely used that approach before. So, okay, we have maybe time for one more question. So this is for Catherine. What do you think could be the impact of the United States Space Force in similar initiatives?
Yeah, so I think going back to that y'all don't have to go back to the astrograph, but looking at that astrograph of how much debris was there, it is a little, I guess, concerning that we're starting new initiatives and we don't really have quite a good idea of how to hold people accountable for the debris that they are producing, whether that be rocket bodies or satellites or anything else to that extent. I do think that is something we need to think about, and that's something that we would like to address further in our research once we get a little bit more of simulations and stuff done.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Really, really appreciate it, and was intrigued by your presentations, Catherine, Rebecca, and Avery. And of course, thank you to you, Jeff, for moderating this session. And now we'll be transitioning to environmental engineering, and we will be hearing from environmental engineering students. Dr. Charles Worth, who is the Associate Chair for Environmental Engineering, will be moderating. So Charlie, he will be getting pinned here momentarily. You will be taking it away. Thank you.
Hi, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too. Thanks so much for having me and our students from environmental engineering on. Like you said, I'm a professor in environmental engineering and associate chair of the program. It's a new degree program, environmental engineering, an undergraduate degree program that we previously didn't have. We started it about 4 years ago. Prior to this, environmental engineering was a specialization within civil engineering and it didn't have its own degree. We have about 60 new students a year now in the environmental engineering degree program, and we anticipate having a steady state of a little over 200 students across all 4 years. As part of this program, we developed 3 new core courses that deal roughly with environmental chemistry, sustainable systems, and then kind of, I guess, treatment design. And then we also have a new design course. Our first class graduated in May of 2020, and we recently had our program evaluated and we got approved for accreditation, which for engineering is a big deal. So it means our students can go on and become professional engineers. So they need to get that licensure. So today we have 2 students, Zoe Welch and Counter Tuning. And I'm going to introduce Zoe first, and she's going to present. And then after she's done, I'll introduce Connor. So Zoe's a junior in environmental engineering. She's from Washington, D.C. She did a Maymester in Milan, Italy, which sounds fun. And she anticipates a future career in air or water quality management. She's been involved in a lot of activities on campus, just a few of them. She's been both mentoring and tutoring freshmen. She was involved in the Bluebird Protection and Research Project as part of the Global Ecology Program. And then she's the co-lead of the Aquaponics Project. And she joined this her freshman year to get hands-on experience in her field. And her goal is to foster a cohesive community of individuals who care about the environment and want to learn and implement sustainable practices. And that's what she's going to talk about today. So I'm going to turn it over to Zoe.
Okay, thank you. Our project is UT Aquaponics. UT Aquaponics was started way back in 2014. We got a green fund and we have 2 greenhouses by the Painter Museum. So next slide, please. So for those who don't know, aquaponics is the combination of hydroponics, which is the process of growing plants in water, and aquaculture, which is growing or breeding fish. This is a symbiotic combination, and it is a food source for everyone. Next slide. So aquaponics is a cycle where the fish produces waste. The waste has ammonium, which is converted using bacteria into nitrates, then converted into nitrates, which is something that the plants need for food, for nutrients. And they use it as their main source of nitrogen. So this normally occurs naturally in typical conventional gardening methods. However, in aquaponic systems, it's produced with the fish. The bacteria, yes. The bacteria exist within the media bed system, or within the media bed. The media bed is filled with rocks, and that's just essentially where the bacteria lives. There's also another type of system, which is a floating raft system. Floating raft systems means that there's no media, which means bacteria doesn't have a place to live. So there's typically an extra element in the system where the bacteria would grow. Next slide, please. Okay. So what makes aquaponics cool? So the picture to the right is a mental health center in Denver, Colorado. They produce all this food for the center that they have. Aquaponics is on its way to becoming a way to mass produce food. However, there's a lot of pushback with organic certifications. Aquaponics doesn't use oil, but soil, but soil is a requirement for organic certification. So there's like a lot of pushback there. And being organically certified makes it more appealing to the mass market. So that's why it's like a big thing to have an organic certification. But it's on its way to becoming a mass production for food. Next slide. So why aquaponics? The biggest reason is it reduces water usage. So an aquaponic system uses about 90% less water usage than conventional gardening or farming methods for the same amount of growing space. This is huge. Since it's a closed cycle, all the water is just reused, which is amazing. It also works in any most growing conditions, which means you can grow it in a city. It doesn't matter. And you can grow any time of the year, which is really great because it empowers everybody to grow their own food. A lot of people who join our project will be like, oh my gosh, I have a aquaponic system in my kitchen or on my porch. I grow my own basil or whatever. So it's really awesome that anyone can build a little system anywhere. It also grows plants and fish in a single system. So the typical fish that they grow or produce is tilapia. So you kind of get like a 2-for-1 food production system, which is awesome. And it also requires a lot less maintenance than your typical conventional growing method. It doesn't require weeding, and it has less outside influence because it's typically built within a greenhouse. It also doesn't have any fertilizer runoff, which we love to see. Next slide. So our system that we currently are growing with is a media bed system. It's also my background. So this, last semester in the spring, we were growing lettuce. Last semester we were growing lettuce, and but COVID-19 happened, so we had to shut down our system temporarily. This is a media bed system, and we typically use goldfish instead of tilapia because tilapia is a little bit harder to take care of, and goldfish produces the same amount of waste. Next slide. This is our new system. It's going to be a floating raft system. So as I said before, they will need an extra element to produce the bacteria needed to have the system run fluently. The reason why we're switching from a media bed to a floating raft is they're a little bit easier to maintain. Rocks are kind of fussy, they get everywhere, and they need to be cleaned. So with our new system, we're hoping to get the necessary, or to meet all the necessary requirements to be able to sell the food that we produce. So next slide. So if you have any more questions or just you want to know more, you can look at UT Aquaponics website. If you just search up UT Aquaponics, you should be able to find it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Zoe. That was fantastic. I think we'll wait for all the questions at the end since we've been doing that format. So we'll go ahead and I'll introduce Connor. Connor's a fourth-year student, also in environmental engineering. Connor studied abroad in Denmark, which also sounds pretty cool. He's pursuing a certificate in humanitarian engineering, and he's been involved in quite a few activities. Engineers Without Borders, Engineers for a Sustainable World. He was technical lead, or is technical lead for Team Thailand. That's part of a class in projects with underserved communities that he's part of. He also, he worked for the outdoor program with Rec Sports as an adventure trip program assistant and trip leader, which I thought sounded pretty fun. Connor might be sick of me. He's been in my class all semester, and he's probably tired of seeing me on Zoom, but here we are together again. So he's pretty tough to be here, taking it again. And for the last 2 years, he's been doing research with Professor Lena Sela on multi-utility demand prediction, event detection, pattern recognition, and equity. And that's what he's going to talk about today. So Connor, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Worth. I just want to start and say that I could never get tired of hearing you talk about hazardous waste. Super fun class. Thank you for coming today, guys. I'm really excited to share a little bit of the research that I've been able to do within the environmental department. The research I'm talking about today, I was able to do with Matthew Frankel, Lou Zing, and Professor Lena Sela. And this project in specific, we looked at the coupled analysis of water and energy consumption within buildings here on campus. Next slide, please. So if you've been tuning in today, you've heard us talk a lot about the UT Sustainability Master Plan. And I've put some of the goals from the original 2016 plan here. They focus on reducing energy consumption and implementing new strategies for conserving water and energy based on building demands. And I just want to point out that our research was funded by the Green Fund, which was implemented by UT to help us achieve these goals. Next slide. Another thing that UT did to promote their sustainability goals was installing smart meters on campus. And these meters, they continuously measure water and energy and other data and have it available online. And from this data, we can answer a number of different questions. We can investigate how efficient buildings are, track changes in performance. We can identify buildings that need intervention and then monitor how well our interventions were in doing this. And so without this data, our research questions specifically, and then all these other questions that we want to look at wouldn't be possible. Next slide. So our research specifically looked at the water and energy use of 70 buildings on campus in order to help group and benchmark them for better demand side management for UT utilities, and ultimately help us reach the sustainability goal that we have on the university's campus. Water and energy are often looked at as separate entities, but we wanted to know if looking at them together could bring new insights and help us reduce consumption in both of these areas. We also wanted to see if this water energy usage could be captured by general building characteristics. And then we took our research one step further and tested whether the high resolution data from these smart water meters that are on campus provide better performance in prediction and modeling than low resolution consumption data. And so by low resolution, that would be like your monthly utilities bills that you might get. Since this is kind of a shorter presentation, I'm only going to focus on the first 2 points though. Next slide. So to start off our research, we needed to define 2 performance metrics. So we looked at normalized consumption and usage intensity for both water and energy. And normalized consumption gives us an internal index of the building, so we can look at the shape of that pattern. Intensity is consumption per unit area, and that allows us to compare an individual building with other buildings on campus. So we looked at these 2 different metrics for both water and energy to give us 4 total performance metrics for each building. And what we needed to do is take all of this data that we had and condense it down into one characteristic pattern for each of these 4 performance metrics. And you can see that in these figures on the right. So these lines represent one weekly pattern that's like a most common pattern for a building. And we looked at those and condensed them down into the thicker line, which represents the characteristic weekly pattern. So we have 4 characteristic patterns for each building. And these are the patterns that provide the benchmarks for water and energy usage and consumption and allow us to group these buildings and classify them on campus. Next slide. So once we had the characteristic patterns, we could look at these patterns and group buildings based on how they behave within each of these 4 metrics. So here we can see how each building behaves on its own within each of these graphs. Each line represents one single building, its characteristic pattern, and then the different colors represent the different groups of buildings that we found within that single metric. And then kind of that thicker line tells you basically a characteristic pattern of each of those groups. So because 2 buildings can behave the same in one metric but different in another, you might find 2 buildings within the blue group for normalized water but then find one of those buildings in the blue group for normalized energy and one of those buildings in the orange group for normalized energy. But our goal is to be able to look at how this performs overall. So if we look at the next slide, we can look at the next step, which was clustering or grouping across all 4 performance metrics using the groupings from the last slide that we looked at. And so this is essentially the same graphs here that we looked at in the last slide, but we've highlighted different buildings. And you can see that they behave similarly across all 4 patterns. And from this grouping and this clustering process, we ended up with 10 different buildings or 10 different groupings. And so we essentially have 10 different images of these that highlight different buildings that behave similarly across all 4 of these metrics. Next slide. So if you look at this image on the left, this shows the composition and number of building types within each of these 10 groups on campus. So you can see that there's a variable number of buildings within each of the groups, but also these colors represent the different building types used by UT utilities to classify their buildings. So for example, gray would be housing, green office and administration, whether it's a research laboratory and so on. And this is a kind of a common thread used to classify buildings and benchmark usage is by looking at kind of how we think a building is used and utilized. But what we see here is that this varies a lot between the behavior of the groups. And so we can't use just water or building characteristics alone to classify these buildings. We need more information to properly classify them. And then this image on the right shows another kind of result that we ended up at, and that's that water and energy behave differently. So we have different shapes and intensity and patterns, and they vary significantly across these different groups and within these groups as well. So in other words, we can't rely just on water behavior alone to determine energy behavior or vice versa. Just as in the other case, we need a lot more characteristics to determine that. Next slide. So overall, what you should take away from this presentation is that smart meters are really cool. Because UT invested resources in the installation of these meters on campus, we had the ability to look at this high resolution data and answer a ton of new questions. And having this data allows us to find patterns and make better predictions and decisions. This has definitely gone a long way to helping UT work towards its sustainability goals. And if you're interested in looking at this a little bit more, our research was recently published in the Journal of Applied Energy, so you can find it there. But with that, that concludes my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks so much, Connor. That was great. Mackenzie, will you ask the questions, or do you take over now, or do I?
Yes, I will.
Have
a couple, we only have like a minute or so. So first, I just want to say congrats, Connor, on publishing. That's fantastic. I did have a question here in the Q&A box for Zoe. It says, are there aquaponics systems that may use excess plant/fish matter to feed some, like crickets, for example, that could then become food for the fish?
You know, I'm not entirely sure if people use fish waste to feed crickets, but I do know that the fish waste has like really important nutrients for plants. So oftentimes they will take the excess waste and it's not naturally water soluble, so they will force it to become water soluble through a biofiltration process and then put it back into the system as a type of fertilizer for the plants. But I haven't heard of them feeding crickets, but that's an interesting idea. Definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, I thought so too. And okay, just really quickly, we have like 30 seconds. So Connor, how would you apply this method to other types of campus situations than COVID, such as holidays or spring break?
Like, how would we use this to kind of classify their usage over those situations?
Yes, yeah.
Right, okay. So that really goes with how much data you have. So we were looking at these common patterns, which are generally not those breaks. And if you actually kind of look at the data, when everybody goes home over breaks, like all of the usage demand and everything goes down. So I think with these methods, they kind of depend on having a lot of that data. And so if we were going to look at how COVID has affected our usage on campus, we're really going to have to kind of look at that prolonged period of time. But you would be able to kind of run that data through our algorithms and our code and be able to come up with really similar results.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Zoe and Connor, and thank you to you, Charlie, for moderating this session. Next, we will be hearing from students in the Bridging Disciplines program. Larissa Nowaki, Assistant Director of the Bridging Disciplines program, will be moderating, and Larissa will be pinned shortly, and she will be introducing the students in the BDP.
Hi, I'm Larissa, and I'm really excited to highlight our Environment and Sustainability Bridging Disciplines program today. Next slide, please. And you can go straight to the next, thanks. So we have 16 different BDP certificates. Environment and sustainability is just one of them. And they all have a few things in common that I wanted to just explain. These are 19 credit hour certificates that students do in addition to their major here at UT. Students do a combination of coursework and experiential learning. And for environment and sustainability, that's in the form of internships, independent research, or research assistantships. And students have a lot of choice as far as what they do there. It just has to be connected to environment and sustainability. In addition to that experiential learning feature, one of the other cornerstones of all of our BDP certificates is that they're interdisciplinary in nature. So when a student does a BDP, they're taking coursework from a variety of departments across campus. And this is really meant to help students get out of their major focus and really look at environment and sustainability in an interdisciplinary way. This is meant to complement what they're already doing for their major. And some students choose to do a BDP really to build on their major focus, but we have other students who pick a BDP that is completely different from their major because this is a way for them to explore something they're passionate about and have another area that they're able to learn about and specialize in here at UT. And BDPs are open to all undergraduate students at UT. It's an application-based program that students enter. They have to be in at least the second semester of a freshman year to apply. But we have students apply really at all along the range of their undergraduate experience. Some students come in earlier, some later. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, environment and sustainability is one of our 16 certificates. This environment and sustainability program is meant to allow students to look at issues of sustainability by taking coursework from natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and more. We have students who also focus on architecture, business. There's a lot of choice though. So we have advisors who help students look at the courses that they can choose from that are approved for the BDP. And decide what really fits that individual student's learning goals to select strand courses. And we do have a forum seminar foundation course that every BDP student takes. So all of our environment and sustainability classes, students take that class to really give them that overall foundation for this certificate. For the environment and sustainability certificate, we currently have just over 50 active students doing that certificate, and they span a wide range of majors at UT. For all of our BDPs overall, we have around 700 students. Environment and sustainability is one of our larger programs. Next slide, please. And before I introduce our first student speaker, I do want to just point out some of the unique benefits that we think students receive from doing a BDP certificate. Students have a chance to gain hands-on experience through that internship or research component. And we, from hearing from our alumni, know that this really can help students prepare for both graduate school and future employment. Students have a chance to take classes with faculty from across the university, not just within their major. And they also work one-on-one with faculty when doing an internship or research project. So we see that this is a chance to gain relationships with faculty across campus. Students also gain that interdisciplinary perspective. And BDPs are very easy to individualize. We have a lot of choices for students, and we have BDP academic advisors that help students to think about those choices and how to take advantage of them and link them to their learning goals. So I hope that gives you a little bit of background information about BDPs and the environment and sustainability, BDP in particular. And I'm excited that we have two of our fantastic students here today to tell you a little bit about some of the highlights of their BDP experience and how this certificate is helping them to have a chance to focus on sustainability while they're here at UT. And first, I'm going to introduce Jack Rouse. Jack is a English and accounting double major here at UT. So he's already getting quite an interdisciplinary perspective just from his double majors, but he's also pursuing the environment and sustainability certificate. So I'm going to turn it over to Jack now.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack. And so I think my BDP journey really starts the summer before my freshman year. I was talking to someone who went to UT and they mentioned the Eco-to-Go program in the dorms of the university. There are these little to-go boxes you can use, like these plastic reusable containers. You have a little token that you give to the person and they give you one and then you give it back. And it was this idea of like, you're saving food and using a reusable container. And for some reason to me, that was just like the most exciting idea. I was like, UT has sustainability figured out. When I go there, this is something I like definitely want to be involved in, and going to orientation and getting involved my freshman year didn't do anything to change that. And so I'm coming into the university as a business major, and I think recognize the need to also have some sort of like meaningful extracurricular involvement, but also to have something that provides like the emotional benefit that the kind of sustainability work does. So I started working with the Campus Environmental Center, which is a student org sponsored by the Office of Sustainability. And before I knew it, by the spring of my freshman year, I had volunteered to lead a project to plant a pocket prairie on campus. And this is not something that had been covered in any of my accounting classes. It's not something I really had any experience with before college either. I think I felt the energy in the room with that group of people at the CEC and really wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. It sounded like it was a really fun project to spend my time at UT doing. But the more I worked on it that first semester and we're having meetings with people who were ecologists and landscape designers, I just like would get really nervous that they were going to like ask about me and figure out that I was an accounting major and that like think I wasn't doing this for the right reasons, or that I didn't even know what I was talking about, which was fine because I didn't. But anyways, I just was really feeling like, well, this is like what I really enjoy doing. And it's really uncomfortable that I can't spend more of my time in my classes learning how to do this thing that I really enjoy doing. And so I learned about the Bridging Disciplines program, and it was this really great low stakes way of learning which kind of, if I know I'm interested in sustainability, where exactly do I want to go? Do I want to go geography? Do I want to go sustainability studies? Do I want to go environmental science? And BDP is really great for letting you get like a cross-disciplinary idea of how you want to approach something as like broad as sustainability. And so one of my highlights was the history class I took was 20th century rural Latin American history. And that was one of those that each semester when they announce which classes are eligible for credit for BDP, I like looked at that one and was like, this one really doesn't feel like it belongs as much as some of the like really clearly like this is intro to environmental sustainability. But that was a really great experience to connect the people part of sustainability that I think is so important to the way I understand it now, but also to expose me to like liberal arts coursework, which really helped build my confidence enough to add that English second major. So BDP was really important for building my set of like professional skills and confidence. and then even gave me the permission to kind of believe in myself and say like, yeah, like even though you aren't, an environmental science major, like you can be in this room and talk about what you care about because you're having these experiences through BDP. And I think that really coalesced in the summer after my sophomore year. I was faced with the decision to either take summer classes for accounting or to do one of my BDP connecting experiences at the Wildflower Center. And the Wildflower Center would have been an opportunity to like learn how to like drive a tractor and like use a chainsaw and like all these like really cool things that are related to what I'm interested in as far as native plants and prairies go. But then if I wanted to graduate accounting this at the time I did, then it's like, well, I have to take summer classes. And so that was a really difficult decision for me to make. But the BDP program scholarships made it a lot easier for me to go for the Wildflower Center internship because it's an unpaid internship. And that's a really difficult thing to accept as a student. And so BDP really helped make that experience possible and definitely pushed me towards that direction. So I think after having all of these different experiences within sustainability, from like liberal arts to sociology to the hands-on connecting experiences, as well as the faculty mentoring that has been so important, I think I probably have less of an idea what sustainability is than when I started. It's kind of just like inflated with each class. It's like, well, this isn't sustainability too, and this is sustainability. And it's really this really wonderful lens that I get to apply to a lot of the decisions and things that I advocate for in my life. And so this last semester, working with this Half Pint Prairie project, we led a student discussion series that I think really gets to what the Bridging Disciplines program is about. We wanted to create space for other students who are organizing around social justice issues to share their experiences with one another and not only take emotional inventory after the events of the summer, but also to look to each other for inspiration and this kind of horizontal organizing and the solidarity that comes with that. And so we called it all of the above because we recognized how important all of these different contributions were to what sustainability is. And so I'm really thankful for the Bridging Disciplines program for allowing me to expand that understanding of what sustainability is to the point where it just seems like it's everywhere.
Thank you so much, Jack, for sharing your BDP experience with us. I'm also excited that we have another BDP student here today with us to share. Jenna Frey is a Human Development and Family Sciences major, and I'll turn it over to her.
Hi, my name is Jenna, and I am a senior in the Environment and Sustainability strand of the BDP. And I'm going to talk about today some of the connections I've made between coursework from my major classes in human development and my certificate classes because of the BDP. Next slide, please. So my parents have been environmentally conscious for as long as I can remember. They stopped eating meat before I was born. And so both my sister and I were raised as vegetarians. Kind of a fun fact, I've never had chicken before, which kind of surprises people. And then that picture is from elementary school when we tried to grow carrots in the backyard. But when I applied to UT, I applied as a biology major. I was still unsure about what I really wanted to do, so I had just planned on taking general core classes to meet the requirements. And I was at orientation freshman year, had my list of classes, backup classes, didn't get into any of them, and then saw Creating a Sustainable Society, and I was interested, and it would fulfill that social and behavioral science requirement. So I enrolled, and I loved it right off the bat. So then later that semester, I was meeting with just my major advisor, and I told her I was interested in switching my major to human development from biology, but then I was also interested in sustainability and was talking about maybe switching colleges or just asking if I could minor in it. And she told me about the Bridging Disciplines program. So I changed my major, applied to the BDP, and now we're here. Next slide, please. I feel like I often get asked what human development and family science really is. And really what it boils down to is relationships, interpersonal relationships, intimate relationships, individuals' relationships with their surrounding environments, how they can be a stressor on the relationship or impact someone's development. And as a student in the BDP, I've also learned how to draw connections and find the relationships between concepts in my major classes and also in the classes I've taken for the BDP about sustainability. Next slide, please. So on the first day of creating a sustainable society freshman year, Dr. Swearingen, the professor, drew this triangle on the board, and it's the sustainability triangles. And as you can see, it shows that society, the economy, and the environment are all connected. And I really appreciate this visual because in its simplicity, it shows how the concept of sustainability at its foundation is about a relationship, and it is inherently interdisciplinary, as there isn't a single correct approach to creating a more sustainable world. Next slide, please. And then these are the courses I've taken for the BDP, and then I put them on the triangle based on the main foci of the course. Next slide. And so these are the titles, and as you can see from the abbreviations and their positions on the triangle too, I've had the opportunity to take courses from multiple departments through the BDP, which has really given me a better understanding of sustainability and what it is holistically. And so that initial course, Creating a Sustainable Society, was kind of an overview and the perfect introduction to sustainability. Biology is under ecological, as we talked about the environment and living systems. Children and environmental health is between ecological and social, as it focused on the effects of exposures to harmful chemicals on human health. In advertising, we talked about the social aspects of sustainability and the importance of how science is portrayed and how societies view science and scientific ideas. And then in sustainable development, which I put under economic, is we focus on the way that economic structures and social structures, how they influence how a place develops. Next slide, please. Another part of the Bridging Disciplines program is a connecting experience. And so this summer, I had the opportunity to do an independent research project with Dr. Jamie Malenta to evaluate the question, why are already vulnerable populations at higher risk of exposure to pollutants, which further burdens their well-being and health? And so I used sociological frameworks of intersectionality and othering to conceptualize vulnerability, and then was able to explore the history of social structures in Los Angeles and did a case study to evaluate the impacts that these structures can have on human health. I looked at the role of racial capitalism, segregation in city planning, and white supremacy in the oil industry there in the mid-1900s, as well as the clear racial disparities in COVID-19 cases today or this summer. And so doing this project on such a prevalent issue highlighted the interconnectedness of our systems and structures, emphasizing the need for knowledge of relationships and an interdisciplinary approach to address these discrepancies and create a more sustainable world for all of us. Next slide, please. Which brings us back to relationships. Next slide. So these are some of the main relationships I've encountered in my time at UT. The knowledge of interpersonal relationships I've gained in my major classes and the skills I've obtained through the BDP to make connections and understand relationships between the disciplines has given me a fuller understanding of what sustainability is. Thank you.
Thank you both. And do we have time for Q&A still?
Yeah, we can ask one question. How about this is both to you. How has your experience working with UT staff been, or bridging discipline staff? It sounds like you've had a really great experience, but how has that been working on your projects?
I can go. I had Dr. Jamie Walenta for a professor in the spring, and then I learned so much about, that was the class about like social and economic structures, and so I took a lot of the things that I learned from her class, and she ended up being my faculty mentor. So was able to apply things from her lectures and being able to learn like one-on-one with someone who is so knowledgeable in a field was super beneficial.
Wonderful. Jack, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think so much of what I've accomplished with the Prairie Project team has been the result of collaborations with staff at the Wildflower Center and also with our own landscape services. So much of what I've learned outside of the classroom has been a result of UT staff and faculty like taking time to talk to me about these things. And so I think I definitely can need to thank them for any like professional development as well as like this burgeoning passion for sustainability.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear. Okay, well, that concludes this session. Thank you so much, Jack and Jenna and Larissa. Thank you so much for moderating. Really appreciate it. And finally, our last session of the day, we'll be hearing from Green Fund recipients. We've already actually heard from a couple of Green Fund recipients. And Jill Parrish, the Green Fund coordinator, will be moderating. Jill, good to see you. And please take it away.
Wow, the last session of the day. It's been such a great day, and I'm thrilled to talk about the Green Fund. And excuse me, I got a sore throat today. And I'm so excited that we're having the students present on a couple of the projects. I'm sorry, I have a phone in my throat. I haven't talked all day. I've been emailing, texting everybody, and behind the scenes, so I haven't used my voice yet today. But so welcome. So the Green Fund is a competitive grant program that's funded through student tuition. Every student contributes $5 a semester and $2.50 each summer session to the Green Fund. And those funds are then made available to students, faculty, and staff through a competitive grant program specifically to fund sustainability projects and student and faculty research on the UT campus and its affiliates like McDonald Observatory and the Marine Science Institute. Those are also eligible grantees. We have funded in the 10 years of its existence over 200 projects to the tune of over $4 million. And a lot of great projects have been performed on campus as a result. Who can apply, as I mentioned, UT students, faculty, and staff. And so I encourage all of you who are participating today to apply for funds if you have a green idea and something that you would like to see on campus or a research project. We fund both, as I mentioned, both student and faculty research. And the presentations that we have today are examples of 2 student research projects that were funded. What other kinds of projects are funded? We fund organic gardens, butterfly gardens, electric bikes for programs, recycling and composting initiatives, solar arrays. So the opportunities are endless. And we also fund student sustainability outreach and education initiatives. One interesting project we funded last year was zero waste theater production. And the students offered courses to other students, a course to other students to learn how to actually give a zero waste production once they perform theirs, using that one as an example. How do you apply? So funds are available through a major competitive grant program beginning in December, and we're hoping to launch this year's program December 19th, and it will likely close February 21st. So there is a 2-month period where you can apply for funds for the larger grants, anything over $1,000 essentially. It is an online application, and anyone who has registered for this presentation or this symposium will get a notification when that application is available and online. We also give workshops where we are available to answer questions about your projects. It's my job to be available to help you bounce ideas off of and assist you with your budgets. So if you have concerns about applying for a grant, you've never done it before, please don't hesitate to reach out and we can help you through it. I don't sit on the committee, so I like to say I'm Switzerland and I'm available to help everybody submit a successful project. The committee is comprised of a student majority, 6 students and 3 faculty and staff, and that was intentional because the funds come from student tuition. The committee, it wants to ensure that the projects that are funded benefit the student body. So it's a great leadership opportunity as well. So in addition to our major grant program, we also run a mini grant program for student organizations. That's what it was created for, but it can be funded, it can fund smaller projects as well, anything less than $1,000. And it's a simpler application and it's available all year round online. Some of the favorite projects that the committee has funded are those projects that connect students with operations staff on campus. Really supporting the living lab idea and experiential learning. And the 2 projects that are highlighted today are exactly that. The idea that it's the dream that a student will be able to perform research on some kind of operational element of how UT is run and be able to provide feedback and perhaps give some creative ideas on how we might improve our processes. So with that, I'm going to introduce Marwan Mahdi and Joseph Onafree, I apologize. Okay. They are going to speak about their project where they worked with landscape services on an irrigation project. And just quickly, Marwan started this project when he was a freshman, and they're both seniors now in electrical engineering. And they're doing this project, they've continued this project, so it's been going on for 4 years, but it's now being done through the Electrical Engineering Senior Design Project in Dr. Mark McDermott's class. So with that.
Thanks, Jill. Today we're going to be talking about a smart irrigation system using unmanned aerial systems that we've been working on to conserve water. I just want to start off by saying thank you to the Green Fund and Jill for generously funding our project. Without them, we wouldn't be able to have gotten any of this started. Next slide, please. So in 2019, UT used 35 million gallons of water for campus irrigation. And while the school has made successful efforts in the past to reduce water consumption, the current irrigation system does not consider the actual health of the grass itself, leaving a lot of room for improvement. By requiring a manual data analysis to make decisions as well as commercially priced ground sensors, the current system is inefficient and expensive. Next slide, please.
So in order to tackle these problems, we worked alongside with UT Facilities to develop a smart irrigation system with 3 components. The collection and analysis of the UAS data is one component. The other component is the development of the utilization of the new ground sensors, which is our second. And our third component is our software system that ties it all together. Next slide, please.
So we gathered UAS data in the form of RGB or red, green, blue, and NDVI or normalized difference vegetation index images of lawns on campus using a Phantom 4 Pro drone equipped with the appropriate sensors. The drone's flown in the lawnmower path above the grass while taking pictures throughout the flight. These pictures are then stitched together to create the maps that are shown on screen. The map on the left is the RGB map of LBJ lawn. Some of you guys might recognize that. And on the right is the NDVI map on the same flight. The way that the NDVI sensor works is that it compares the ratio of near infrared to visible light that's reflected off of the grass. And based off that ratio and a little bit of processing, you're able to determine the difference. You're able to determine how stressed the grass is. This is represented on the map by different colors, with orange and yellow areas being stressed and green areas being healthy. Grass health data is important in conserving water since we're able to use it to irrigate the grass using the least amount of water possible while keeping the grass looking green. Next slide, please.
And here we have our ground sensors. These ground sensors measure moisture content of soil within different depths of the ground. These are configured in a mesh network for communications. So what that just means is that we have several soil sensors planted in each zone, and they communicate with a mesh communication, and then they'll transmit all this data to one receiver, which will transmit data to our database. These are powered by a long-lasting battery life that comes out to approximately 6 years. So these are designed for a sleek and secure waterproof case. And within total, these are come out to $60, which is 1/10 of UT's soil sensors that are road commercial of $600. Next slide, please. So to tie everything together, our irrigation software would use a UAS data and our ground sensor data together with local weather data to give an irrigation recommendation for every zone in the field where the irrigation can be independently manipulated. This determines how much to irrigate each zone with the use of the least amount of water possible. So this data and recommendation displayed on custom is on our dashboard. So for example, for our screenshot here, our dashboard below, the algorithm is recommended to not schedule any irrigation since there will be sufficient precipitation forecasted within 36 hours. Next slide, please.
So looking ahead, we plan to perfect the algorithm and to continue to collect data going forward. And we intend to implement the system more places around campus while continuing to work with UT facilities to adjust the irrigation. And we hope to save millions of gallons of water on campus and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take questions at the end. Our next presenter is Kingsley Weye. And Kingsley works in Dr. Naji's lab in the Intelligent Environments Laboratory. And his project involves the utilities and energy management team. And I'm going to pass it over to you. Another example of a great research project that's partnering with operations staff.
All right. Hi, I'm Kingsley, and I'm a master's candidate in the civil department, and I'm advised by Dr. Nagy. I'll be presenting our work on the impact of COVID-19 on the campus energy use. Next slide, please. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we have seen high case counts and some results in mortality. Particularly during the summer semester period, we experienced a global peak and we experienced other local peaks in other months. By mid-March, we had begun to see noticeable spread of the virus in the Austin community, which also coincided with the beginning of the spring break here at UT. So the question is, what has been the impact of the spread in our community? Next slide, please. So using January's road traffic data at select intersections in Austin as the baseline, we observed regular road use until mid-March, when the roads went relatively quiet across all the intersections. And we suspect the spike on Airport Boulevard is a result of emergency HEB trips just before the lockdown. Of interest is the Martin Luther King Jr. intersection near UT, which has continued to remain silent even in recent times. So where is everyone going? Next slide, please. Google's mobility reports provides relative change in number of people at public places and time spent in residential places. Next slide, please. And we can observe that before the government issued shelter-in-place order on the 24th of March, workplaces and universities inclusive had seen a decline in visitors, while more time was spent in residential places. Next slide, please. How has energy use in UT been affected? Next slide, please. So we collected data from the building automation system. The total building stock we used for this analysis was about 14.7% of the total buildings on campus, mainly academic campus buildings. And the limitation is mainly because of data availability and completeness. And our analysis involves comparison of the 2020 trend to the average of 2017 to 2019. Next slide, please. So this heat map shows the difference between 2020 and average historical electricity use. Note the white spaces are just missing data points. Next slide, please. So between February and late March, consumption remained similar to previous years. And the first campus COVID case, which was on the Friday before spring break, also marked the beginning of statewide precautionary measures. Next slide, please. The effects of the pandemic became more apparent after the university extended the spring break for classes to resume online at the end of March. Next slide, please. And by changing the scale of analysis to average daily change, we see consumption had dropped by about 25% at the end of the break. Next slide, please. The minimum drop occurring between April and May was due to the lower spring semester occupancy because classes had gone online by that time. Next slide, please. And the drop in summer did not reach the extremes of the spring since occupancy in the summer is usually low. Next slide, please. The chilled water heat map tells a different story in the sense that while consumption dropped during the pandemic, there are periods where it is higher than previous years. And when we impose cooling degree day data on this heat map, we see periods of higher consumption actually coincide with days where the cooling degree days are higher in 2020 compared to the average of previous years. Next slide, please. So to conclude, the reduced mobility around the campus shows correlation with reduced energy use. We also conclude that electricity consumption on the campus is correlated with the expected occupancy, hence has seen sustained drop during the COVID period compared to past years. And while chilled water consumption has equally dropped, it is still associated with weather-driven HVAC loads. And additionally, from interaction with utilities, it was found that there had actually been a reduction in HVAC operating hours during the spring and a subsequent increase in ventilation during the summer that would have impacted the chilled water and electricity consumption. Next slide, please. And I would like to appreciate Green Fund, the utilities and energy management of the university, as well as the civil and architectural and environmental engineering departments. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
Wow, those are excellent presentations. Thank you all so much. It's really one of the great things about the Green Fund is that it continues to empower students to use the campus as a living laboratory and be really creative in your research projects. So, and that really came through in your presentations. So thank you. We have several minutes for some question and answer. We do have a question from the audience. This is for Marwin and Joseph. What was your inspiration for this system? Are aerial systems used widely by farms?
Yeah, I can answer that. So they are used widely by farms right now, not as widespread as they could be because the technology is still new, but they're primarily used in order to adjust chemicals and fertilizers and then detect any early diseases or something like that so they can stop the spread. We're just trying to apply the same technology to water conservation. And so far it's looking promising.
Wonderful. Kingsley, question for you. How can UT apply this research after COVID is over? What might be applied post-COVID from your research?
So one thing we're trying to do with this research is to see how this tallies with other indicators such as occupancy particularly. So right here, we're inferring our own knowledge of how occupancy would have changed, but we also want to tie this in with actual occupancy data, particularly from Wi-Fi data, and see how we can use these different indicators to predict, or could it be how we have demand controlled ventilation, or how you can control the movement of people within the buildings to make sure that you're both conserving energy while still keeping people comfortable, since we're not expecting as much occupancy as we would in previous semesters.
Excellent. And then just a final question actually for all of you, because there might be some students watching that are interested in the Green Fund and maybe have some great ideas. So can you just explain what you learned going through the process and give any tips for people that might be interested?
Marwan, I think you might be.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think your project has a really high chance of getting sponsored if you do partner up with a UT system like facilities or something. And then also, I know Engineers for a Sustainable World and some other orgs, they have a lot of green feed grants that projects that have already been approved. If you reach out to those organizations, they can actually give you all of their old grants applications that got approved, and looking at those will help a lot in terms of knowing what to put on there.
For both of you, how would you describe the experience of working with operations staff? What did it add to your project?
It was
Sorry, Joseph.
So to answer that, it was a very big project for us. So Marwan had a big background on this project before, but the rest of the 5 of us, we had to adjust our studies of how we would implement this project to make it more like effective, because our image moving forward is to have this project being worked on in the near future. But our goal is to have not just UT's campus using this for their facilities, but all the rest of the facilities around the United States to use as well. Of course, that's a dream goal, because I know every university doesn't have a lot of lawns or lands on their campus. But if some were to use just a tiny bit of our information or like our project altogether, it could save almost billions gallons of water per year. I know approximately there's 5,300 universities and colleges around the United States. And if they were to use our project, it would be really effective to save billions of water, like 5.3 billions of gallons of water. So it's more of like a why, why would you want to, improve this? And it'd be really effective to just, save as much water as we can. And it's really meaningful to have your why. So just to answer that.
Wonderful. And Kingsley, did you want to add anything?
Oh yes, so working with utilities in particular has really helped me in the sense that, usually when we do like class projects, it's just on a much smaller scale, one building analysis, but, having that relationship with utilities where you can scale things up to multiple buildings and really understand why they do the things they do. I have a professor who usually says the building industry is one that, will never change. Things are usually done the same way. And, having the experts in this field really advise me on why they do things the way they do them has really helped me to shape my research questions, particularly for my master's degree.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marwan, Joseph, and Kingsley, and thank you to Jill for moderating this session. This is the conclusion of the Student Sustainability Research Showcase. If you would like to learn more about these different degree programs, I encourage you to visit the university's new Sustainability and Environment Degrees website. It's at sustainabilitydegrees.utexas.edu, and I'm just going to drop that in the chat here. And thank you all so much for attending, and thank you to all the presenters today. It was a really great session. And now I'll be passing it back to Jim for the closing remarks. So thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and to all the student presenters and their program leadership who just went through that showcase. Every year that we do this symposium, I'm impressed, I'm inspired by the kind of what the students are working on, what kind of questions they're pursuing, how rich their experiences have been on campus. So thank you all for taking the time on a Friday afternoon to share what you've been doing. Thank you to President Hartzell for his keynote address and spending some time with us there, and to Anaga Kikeri for introducing him from UT Student Government. Thank you to the President's Sustainability Steering Committee, all the members who were able to attend throughout the day, and Dean Goldbart and Dean Mora for participating to the extent they did, and a special shout out to Sri Chapiti for doing a great job moderating the town hall this morning. Thank you to the Mitchell Foundation. I know we had several folks from the Mitchell Foundation attend parts of the day. Thank you for your years of support across the university, not just with us in this event, but in many other departments. Thank you to Jennifer and Sarah from TREX, who have been behind the scenes with us over the last couple weeks, putting all this together, making sure it was all running smoothly. Thank you to my colleagues, Brianna Duran, Jill Parrish, and Mackenzie Beveridge, for all the creativity and the logistical work putting this all together. We are a great team. Remember to visit the UT Austin Sustainability website for additional feedback. That will be up for months. So kind of think about if something else occurs to you over the weekend or over the break or whenever, just please remember you can still give us feedback anytime you want. And please be sure to attend the Environmental Science Institute Hot Science at Home event later this evening, starting at 7 p.m. We have scrolled through the QR code to register for that, but it should be pretty easy to find that. This evening's talk features Dr. Monica Ramirez Andreada from the University of Arizona, and her talk is on cultivating science and environmental justice. So very much in keeping with some of the high points of today's symposium. So thank you all again for being with us, and have a great Friday afternoon.